I appreciate you, Margaret, as well, for your leadership on our board, and all of our regional board members who are here. Thank you for coming. Also, I acknowledge George Saline, who's somewhere in the audience as well in the back, who Margaret mentioned is our Senior Vice President of Programs. So, we are just going to dive right in, because this is my first time having the opportunity to talk like this in Michigan. But I'm excited to get to know you a little bit, maybe for you to get to know me a little bit, and talk about some of the issues as I see it that we're facing as a community. So what I'm going to do tonight is go through a bit of a presentation, and then we'll just have a Q&A. And I know there's some written questions, you'll be able to ask questions from the audience, and we'll go at it. So, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to talk a little about myself, talk about the world as I see it, what are some of the trends that are driving things today, give you a little bit about ADL for those who might not know, and then talk about some of the big bets we're making as we look ahead. So first, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. So this is a picture that was taken in the free city of Danzig, which is a German city. It's now known as Gdansk because it's located in the heart of Poland. It was taken in the late 30s. And this, you can read what it says across the top, perhaps. This is my grandfather, Bernie Greenblatt. That was his store before it was destroyed. Crystal not, before he lost almost all of his family, before he came to the United States. And so for me, the fact that my grandfather was so direct, his experience as a survivor and losing almost everything was an incredibly formative experience for me. My worldview, in part, was shaped by him. And despite all he had lived through, my grandfather still was a person of incredible hopefulness, like many survivors, who still had a kind of realistic optimism. And he wanted us, me and my brother and my cousins, to realize that we could still change the world and be part of something bigger than us. That was why when I was a little kid, he had me and my brother and my cousins out marching down the streets of Bridgeport, Connecticut, to free the Soviet Jews. Now, I'm guessing some of you in this room were involved in that. Raise your hand if you were involved in the movement to free the Soviet Jews, like a few of you. So, as a little kid, we wrote letters, and we did these marches, but then something really remarkable happened. They were freed. Like, they were freed. And I learned something at a very little age, that I could be a part of something bigger than myself, that I could be a part, little me, of changing the world. And that never left me. That stayed with me, that lesson that I learned as a really little boy. And it's part of the reason why I made some of the career choices that I did. To start a company that would try to help children around the world get clean water. To sell that company to one of the biggest brands on the planet and run that piece of business. To launch a venture with money and support inside of Google. And then to eventually take a job at the White House. I've been blessed to be part of a bunch of different movements that were bigger than me. I've been fortunate to have a chance to work in different sectors and to try different things. And that true north of changing the world has always been with me. It remains with me today. I think about it when I think about this job. How can I change this world? Because I have one core purpose now in this job, which is to protect the Jewish people. That is my charge. And what's complicated about that is what we're living through right now. Where we are today. So today, we just released our annual report. At the ADL, we literally audit anti-Semitic incidents. We have 25 offices around the country, including right here in Detroit. And we are in the business of receiving calls from individuals, school principals, executive directors of synagogues, or JCCs just like this one. And the fact of the matter is, what people at ADL will tell you, who've been there much longer than me, we've never had a moment like this in recent memory. And the number last year, as you can see, the third highest we've ever seen in 40 years of collecting this data. We had almost 1,900 incidents around the United States. This was a slight decrease over last year. That's the good news. It was still the third highest in our history. We had nearly double the number of incidences in 2018 that we did just 3 years earlier. Think about that for a minute. It used to be that anti-Semitic incidents were correlated to events in the Middle East. So something would happen. There would be a spasm of violence in Israel, a war with Gaza, a war with Lebanon, and anti-Semitic incidents would spike. But in fact, today, what we see is there's no longer a correlation. The acts of harassment, vandalism, and violence are just up. In fact, we had 105% more assaults in 2018 than in 2017. In fact, we had almost triple the number of victims year over year. And in fact, the year was punctuated by the most violent anti-Semitic incident in American history. The shooting in Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. And I was at that synagogue just a few days after the shooting. And let me tell you, as the CEO of the ADL, my worst nightmare had been that I would wake up one morning and my phone would buzz, and I would open it to read about a shooting at a synagogue in Europe, a stabbing at a school in Belgium or France or Amsterdam or Birmingham or London or Berlin or Vienna or Budapest or Warsaw or Toulouse or Marseille. I think you get the drift. What I didn't expect was my phone would buzz while I would be in synagogue myself. And I would have to go after services out to the parking lot to open it up and to see that it wasn't a murder at some foreign place. It was right here in the United States. Now, you know some of anti-Semitism here in Detroit. And let's just acknowledge that. Anti-Semitism is not new. Anti-Semitism has been with us as a Jewish people for thousands of years. It's often described as the oldest hatred. But I think many of us, I'm guessing many of you, thought this was a relic of another time. Thought this was an artifact of a different Detroit and a different America. And I'm afraid to tell you that you were wrong. And that we have a new reality today. And that's what we're going to talk about. So let's talk about what the trends are that I think are contributing to the world that we're living in today. So first, I would say we're living in a state of what I would call disunion. Now look, let me be very clear with you. I really, and let me just say this very clearly, I could care less how you vote. I don't care. I don't care if you're a Republican. I don't care if you're a Democrat. You may read about me that I do, but I truly do not. I don't. I don't give money to candidates. I'm not a lifelong political operative. I'm not. Well, but whereas I don't care how you vote, I do care what you value. And neither side of the political spectrum has a monopoly on morality. Neither political party is exempt from intolerance. And we'll talk about that tonight. But what is absolutely, positively true, and again, I'm going to talk about facts tonight, and I'm going to try to do it in a non-emotional way, is that our country is more polarized and more riven than it has ever been. At least in, say, I don't know, the last 100 plus years. Now, it's true that there were shootings in Kent State some 50 years ago. That was a pretty divisive time. And 150 years earlier, we had a civil war in this country. That's all true. But I hear stories after stories as I travel the country about workplaces, about PTAs, about longtime friends, about families that have been divided by politics. It is ugly. I just heard another story tonight. This tone of intemperance And this tone of hostility, I would say it is being set from the top. But the fact of the matter is, again, we're living in a moment where every action sort of generates an equal and opposite reaction. You can't lay this at the foot of just one person. All of us are responsible, and all of us will be involved in solving this problem. But the disunion that prevails today is deeply damaging, and it has infected our Jewish community as well. I would say that we are gripped. We are sort of swept in by the tides of this toxic politics. And I think it's very corrosive and damaging for our community, which I would argue can't afford it. Part of this is being fueled by social media. Again, we've always had, difficult arguments. Our democracy is literally predicated upon fierce debate, and we're Jews. All we do is argue. But social media has changed the dynamic deeply. And I would say to you that really it's allowed the kind of stereotyping and slander that previously really wouldn't see the light of day. It's now all out on the open. What do I mean? This is what I mean. Unfortunately, as the head of the ADL, this is my life. Tweets like this, Facebook pages like this, YouTube videos like this. But keep in mind that literally, for your children or your grandchildren, I would bet they couldn't tell you what's on ABC tonight at 8 o'clock, but they're all watching YouTube videos on their phone. I would bet your grandchildren haven't picked up the phone to call you in a long time, but they're all texting with their friends. They're on WhatsApp. They're on House Party. They're on Snap. They're on Insta. That's how they're talking to each other. Do you know how many messages Facebook reports moving across its platforms every day? Get ready. 80 billion. The size and scope of this is not anything we can actually really comprehend. So social media has eaten our world. It's created an environment in which our kids are addicted to their cell phones, and maybe even all of us. We look for that hit, that next like, or that next poke, or that next text, that instant gratification, and it's created the conditions in which this toxicity has really flourished. And it's contributed to what I'll describe to you as the normalization of anti-Semitism. Again, as I told you a few minutes ago, anti-Semitism isn't new. There were cemetery desecrations, and there's been acts of vandalism. What's different today, it has now suddenly become a kind of like a virus that's infected everyone, seemingly everywhere. And you're seeing it in all kinds of places. You're seeing it in the way high school kids do pranks. You're seeing it on the pages of our most respected newspapers. You're seeing it in flyers that are appearing, not in some rural cornfield, like in Iowa, where you think the white supremacists may be. This flyer here, Barnard College in New York. And so we shouldn't be surprised when rhetoric degenerates into something much worse. Because we know this at ADL. And the sociologists will tell you the same thing. That unchecked, unresponded to, rhetoric can often mutate into something far more malevolent. And what are we seeing at ADL? Well, in addition to, the massacre at the Tree of Life Synagogue, and then 6 months to the day, the shooting at the synagogue in Poway. And I will tell you this, I was there. I was there hours after the shooting, praying with the rabbi's family, with Rabbi Goldstein's sons, and sitting with the families of the victims. Because it was the last day of Pesach and whatnot. And what I learned being there was that the shooter, what saved so many people in that shul, was the fact that the shooter was a 19-year-old kid who didn't know how to use the gun. Literally, and who dropped it when he got yelled at by some of the people in the congregation who ran up to him. and there were 50 unused bullets in the chamber because he couldn't figure out how to reload it. It's a miracle, literally a miracle, that far more people weren't killed. But that was a month ago. This week I'm dealing with an attempted arson attack at a synagogue in Chicago. That, by the way, followed 3 arson attacks at Chabad houses in Boston. And daily in Brooklyn, New York, assaults on Orthodox men in particular, in broad daylight, like this one captured by a surveillance camera. Assaults in broad daylight on the city, in the streets of New York City. By the way, I was with the Deputy Commissioner of the NYPD last week. For the first 4 months of 2019, they've seen an 84% increase in anti-Semitic crimes versus the first 4 months of 2018. So when I say it's like a virus or an epidemic, I mean it. And unless we do something about it, it's not going to get any better. Now, it's also being fueled by other forces, and I will call out now what I'll call the ascendancy of the radical left. There have always been left-wing fringe elements, but we're seeing them mainstream today in a way that is actually new. Anyone know who this is? Erstwhile chair of the Women's March. And we got a lot of flack at ADL from folks on the left when we called out the fact that she and another one of her co-organizers, Tamika Mallory, last year, or it was in 17, were at her co-chair was at Louis Farrakhan's annual speech in Chicago, which was, here's a spoiler alert, it was pretty awful. And she was spreading him on social media, and that led to a bunch of attention from Tablet Magazine and CNN, and really the Women's March was unraveled, which is a shame. It's a shame that the bigotry and anti-Semitism of a few of the people have poisoned all the apples in the barrel. But it's not unique to Linda Sarsour. What's worrisome about this radicalism on the left is how it's spreading. And I talked, with Mark Schlissel from the University of Michigan, when that professor, and I know all of you know that story, right, refused to give a letter of recommendation to that qualified student when he learned she wanted to be studying Israel because he was part of the BDS movement. And we've seen it, how other movements like Black Lives Matter have somehow adopted the anti-Israel narrative. And we've seen it in like musicians like Roger Waters, whose anti-Semitism is sort of off the charts, although he disguises it as anti-Israel. And I dealt with it very directly with Congresswoman Omar, whose comments about Jews were horrific, which is why the ADL led the call for a resolution, led the call to get Nancy Pelosi and the Democratic House to push a resolution to call out her anti-Semitism, because that was the issue at hand. And that's what needed to be addressed, period. So we're seeing something, whether it's in the halls of Congress, or on our college campuses, or in social movements, or in the entertainment field, that's worrisome. But don't think that this problem is only a function of the left, because I am deeply worried about the institutionalization of the extreme right as well. Now, this picture looks comical, and it would be if this man hadn't been the GOP nominee for a seat in Congress last election cycle. He ran unopposed in the GOP primary, and he won 26% of the vote. Now, did he win that again in rural Iowa or Idaho, where we think about the white supremacists having their compounds? No, again, I'm talking downtown Chicago. And he got 56,000 votes. But interestingly enough, he was only one of a dozen white supremacists who ran for office last year. A dozen. Again, there have always been racists in politics, but never before have they felt so open, so brazen, so unapologetic. And he's not unique. So we had Congressman Getz from Florida literally bring a Holocaust denier to the well of the House of Representatives to watch the State of the Union with him 2 years ago. We have people like Gavin McGinnis from the Proud Boys, who are literally penetrating political circles on the GOP side. We had a series of ads last year, like this one, running against Josh Lowenthal, who's running for a state assembly seat in Southern California. I'm sure you can see what he's holding in his hand. That's what his GOP opponent ran against him. And if you simply listen to what the president says himself from the cabinet room or from a press avail, when he talks about globalists, when he talks about open borders, when he talks about migrant caravans, when he talks about conspiracies funded by George Soros. I might not be breaking any news here, but that is phrases and rhetoric that he himself didn't develop. And I know this because at the ADL we track extremists, and this is language and phrasing that comes from white supremacists. That's where it originates from. How it makes its way into the talking points of the West is beyond me. Now again, I don't care how you vote. I don't care if you love Donald Trump or hate Donald Trump. What I worry about is the institutionalization of this kind of rhetoric, which is really quite bad for us. Now, another factor driving this are changes within our own community. And they are real. And many of the audience I talk to may be a little bit older, maybe more Ashkenazi, and maybe unfamiliar with this. You know what this is a picture of? A protest that took place at the lobby of the ADL headquarters in Manhattan. And who are these people, these young people? These are young Jewish activists who are protesting the ADL to make the point that we weren't really progressive, that I'm really some conservative, ideologue who hates Palestinians and is leading the Jewish community into the abyss. This is a group called If Not Now. But the nature of our community is changing. Our millennials today, let alone the next generation, they are less identified, they are less affiliated, they will be more intermarried, they will be more entrepreneurial in their Judaism as in their life. And the diversity of our community is changing, the politics of our young people are changing. This is reality. And they have very different views about Jewish institutions, and very different views about politics and social norms. And this is neither good or bad. This is simply a reality. And it's fueling much of the change in society. And there's a factor we need to think about as we contemplate what does our future look like. Now, there are forces at work abroad as well. The rise of authoritarianism, again, spoiler alert, it's not good for the Jews. And authoritarianism comes in many forms. You have the Islamist version in Erdogan in Turkey. He is a Muslim Brotherhood member. His brand of political Islam is dangerous for Israel. It's dangerous for the Turkish Jewish community. It's dangerous for us all. You have the version in Germany. The AfD is the third largest party in the Bundestag today. They are an openly right-wing, openly hyper-nationalist party, and flirt with many of the languages that are familiar to anyone who's studied National Socialism. And then you have Bolsonaro in Brazil, who is ostensibly great friends with the Prime Minister, but is another brand of authoritarianism, although his focus is down in South America. And then, of course, Jeremy Corbyn in the UK. So whereas Erdogan is of the Islamist variety, and the AfD is of the kind of extreme right-wing variety, Jeremy Corbyn is of a radical left-wing variety that is literally almost too terrifying to contemplate, because he's this close to being the next Prime Minister of the UK. And he is a virulent and unapologetic anti-Semite, and a virulent and unapologetic anti-Zionist. And I was just there literally 2 weeks ago meeting with not just the Jewish community in England, but meeting with members of parliament who are not Jewish, who say to me, who look me straight in the eye and say, don't let what we are afraid. We have people who've left the Labour Party because of it's the incorrigible anti-Semitism that Jeremy Corbyn has brought to the party. And remember, it starts with the Jews. It never ends with the Jews. It never ends with the Jews. And these people said to me, Don't let what happened here happen in America. And then, of course, we have the uncertainty in the Middle East. We have the saber rattling between the U.S. and Iran. And make no mistake, for those of you who doubt or who wonder, the Islamic Republic of Iran is the largest state sponsor of terror in the world. It is an inveterate violator of human rights of their own people. And we at the ADL, again, who study this will tell you, they are the largest state sponsor of anti-Semitism in the world. And they are an implacable and inexplicable enemy of the Jewish state of Israel. They are a huge problem. They're not the only problem. And we don't know how the deal of the century will work out. And we don't know how the politics in Israel will work out. And we don't know what this is going to mean for Jordan. And we don't know what's going to happen in Syria, or what was once Syria. There's a lot of uncertainty in the Middle East, which can affect us here for sure. So a bunch of different issues. And these are all on my mind as I think about my job at ADL. Which leads me to what do we do and who are we? So a quick background. The ADL was founded in 1913, right around the time when this man, Leo Frank, was lynched outside of Atlanta. Some of you may know the story. Jewish businessman from New York went down to the South to manage his family's pencil factory at a time when there was pervasive anti-Semitism, what we would call structural anti-Semitism. Jews, literally, were not allowed to live in many neighborhoods because of restrictive housing covenants that kept them from buying homes. They were held back, not admitted to universities because of quotas. There were widespread cultural and the enforcement of cultural anti-Semitism, kept out of professions and restaurants and etc., clubs. And rampant anti-Semitism, rampant defamation and slander in the press. And in that environment, when a young non-Jewish girl was found sexually assaulted and strangled to death in the facility that he managed, they immediately blamed the Jew. And Leo Frank was immediately sort of tried in a court of public opinion and found guilty. And then there was a sham trial where he was truly found guilty, even though there was exonerating evidence. The governor intervened because it clearly wasn't due process, and commuted his sentence from the death penalty to life in prison. And the mob was so enraged, they tore Leo Frank from his jail cell and they hung him from a tree. And in that moment, a group of lawyers in Chicago felt compelled to create an organization that would defend the Jews. And they wrote a charter, this is it, for this new entity they wanted to create, the Anti-Defamation League. And in the charter are the words which we still use today as our mission statement. And they have literally lasted for 106 years. That our mission is to stop the defamation of the Jewish people and secure justice and fair treatment to all. We have always believed that to fight for the Jews, that you also have to fight for others. And when you make America good for its others, it would also be good for its Jews. Sometimes I hear people say to me, Jonathan, like, the only thing you should be doing is anti-Semitism. That's it. I get that. I feel like it is my job to fight hate. But my mission compels me to realize that by fighting for the Jews, by fighting anti-Semitism, which is what I do every single day, tooth and nail, I'm also fighting for the America I want to leave to my children, my grandchildren. That's why, long before I was born, the founders of ADL filed an amicus brief from Brown v. Board of Education. Why they marched with Dr. King. Why they fought so hard for civil rights in this country. And years later, for many other civil rights gains related to immigration, related to women's rights, related to marriage equality. It's why we've done that work then. And yet today, the work continues. Because anti-Semitism remains a problem as we see this resurgence. And because we're living in a time in this country where somehow the government literally thinks it's morally permissible not just to separate children from their parents when they cross the border, but to put them in cages and to ship them away Now, how do I know this? Because I've seen it. Because I went to the border. Because I saw the conditions these kids were being held in. And I'm sorry, as an American and as a Jew, this is not acceptable. And not only is it not acceptable, it is not a dilution of our mission to fight for these children and to fight for the America that we've always known and held dear, that gave us all this privilege and us all these rights. So that's why we do this work. And we'll continue to do it relentlessly and undaunted no matter what the critics say. So what do we do? How do we do the work? We do three things at ADL. We do advocacy. We try to change laws in the courts or in Congress, or I will speak out in the court of public opinion. We do that a lot, the federal, state, and local level. Secondly, we do education. To stop hate, you've got to change hearts and minds. Today, we're one of the largest providers of anti-hate content in schools. Education is the way we can inoculate our kids from intolerance. And so we are trying to vaccinate our children, and today we reach 1.5 million kids all over the country. We're one of the largest providers of this content. And then thirdly, we work with law enforcement. We track hate crimes, we help them investigate hate crimes, and we train them. We're the largest trainer of law enforcement in America on issues of extremism and hate. This is what we do. And we show up in communities across the country. So when there's a hate crime, we get the call. We'll help the police investigate it. We'll work with the school to do programming for the kids around it. And we'll make sure the laws are in place. Literally, we are the organization that got hate crimes laws passed in this country in 45 states and helped get the federal law passed and signed into effect in 2009. We did that. We did that. So now where are we going? Where do we go from here? Let me tell you about the big bets that I'm making. Well, first thing I should say is the only way I'm able to do this is because of my people. And since coming on board, I've tried to bring what I learned at Starbucks and Google, what I learned in the White House, so that we are delivering at the highest level. The team I've been able to assemble, including George, including Carolyn, they come from places like GM. They come from places like the federal government. And they come from blue chip brands like GE or Amex or Disney or Bernstein. I am recruiting a best-of-class team who can deliver the kind of execution that you should expect of me if you're a donor. Because I don't think of you as donors, I think of you as shareholders. And you should expect this, and I'm going to try to deliver on that. So what's a big bet? A big bet is like some guy saying he would take his computer company and turn it into an entertainment business, turn it into a phone company, and transform it into the most valuable company created in the history of humankind. Steve Jobs made a big bet on iTunes and a big bet on the iPhone, and that's what I think about what we're doing at ADL. We are making big bets. Let me tell you one thing. Whether you like ADL or not, those organizations who keep doing the same old thing, you should expect the same results. You just should. And if you're happy with the results, you should do more of that. Really, you should. And if you think we can only stand for ourselves, you should work with them. I think we've got to stand for something bigger, and I think we've got to try new stuff and make some big bets. So let me tell you what my big bets are. The first bet is on cyber. Now I know this and believe this in my heart because I see what I showed you earlier every day. And I used to run teams of engineers in Silicon Valley. I've raised money there, I've sold businesses there. I get that world. And today, the front line in fighting hate is on Facebook. Yeah, sure, it shows up on our college campus. Yeah, sure, it shows up on the editorial pages of our newspapers. Yeah, sure, it shows up in classrooms. But I am telling you, the front line is on Facebook. Social media is the battlefield. So here's how we're going to war. First, we launched an office in Silicon Valley in 2017, a center on technology and society. We are recruiting PhDs, and we have partnerships using tools like AI and machine learning to try to track and intercept online hate before it happens. We're holding hackathons. We're holding competitions with engineers and product people trying to develop not only better products, but help the companies reinvent their algorithms. And every day, we work with Facebook and YouTube, Twitter and Reddit, Microsoft, and all the different arms of Google, or Alphabet, as it were. And by working directly with their leaders, whether it's Tim Cook, or it's Susan Wojcicki, or it's Sheryl Sandberg, we are making progress in different ways, and I'm happy to talk about that in the Q&A. And we're doing analyses and reports, literally measuring hate online, studying trends like anti-Semitism on Twitter, and now looking at new horizons like the gaming industry, e-gaming, e-sports. This is literally a $180 billion industry. And we are determined to make sure that the prejudices that prevail offline don't penetrate the gaming world. And by the way, if you don't know what I'm talking about, go ask your kids about Fortnite. Or your grandchildren about Fortnite, and they'll tell you a thing or two. Second big bet that we're making is on extremism. I think extremism is a tremendous problem, wherever it appears. And it comes in different forms, as I said. And so we are upgrading our capabilities to monitor extremism, improving our capacity, as we've always done, to track the extremists, not just, if you will, at their rallies and meetings, but in their chat rooms and discussion boards. We're following them whether or not they realize it, and we're watching. We form partnerships like we did with the U.S. Conference of Mayors. We have over 300 mayors working with us after Pittsburgh to bring anti-hate programming and law enforcement training to their communities. We're working with companies like Airbnb, and in that case, Airbnb made their announcement about 6 months ago, unexplained, sudden, about pulling their listings from the West Bank. And whether they liked it or not, fueling the fire of the BDS movement. And I would tell you that the delegitimization of Israel is a form of extremism. Anti-Zionism is a form of anti-Semitism. Make no mistake about it. And so we work with Airbnb, and I spent time with the CEO, spent time in their office in San Francisco, and explained why what they had done was so problematic, and gave them our advice and our counsel, and were clear about it. And I was pleased when I got a note from their head of policy a couple hours before their announcement that they reinstated all their listings in the West Bank. Now, whether or not you think, I should say this, the ADL, we are fervent advocates for a two-state solution. We deeply believe in it. But if Airbnb wants to take a position, it's got to explain how it's doing it. It needs to do a better job than they did, because they might inadvertently fuel the extremists. And that's what we help them understand. And again, and we're not only reacting, we're proacting. We're not only responding to what happens, we're developing new strategies to stop it from happening in the first place. Like our Innovate Against Hate competition that we launched in about 24 college campuses, giving college students with a prize-based model to crowdsource new ways we could counter extremism. They came up with some brilliant ideas. Think about this as Shark Tank for stopping hate. And I can talk about that in the Q&A if you want to hear more. And then thirdly, we're embracing this idea of inclusion. I will not allow the intersectionalists to exclude our community or anyone else from being at the table. Forget about it. So, we're creating partnerships. We've got some exciting engagements working with the Chelsea Football Club in the UK to bring programming. We just did a big event, worked with them on a big event that happened last week in New England. We launched a partnership with the Aspen Institute, a new leadership development program that will try to address and curb the polarization I talked about before. We created a task force being chaired by former DHS Secretary Jay Johnson, who served in the Obama administration, and former DHS Secretary Mike Chertoff, who served in the Bush administration. A Democrat and a Republican, a Jewish person and a Christian person, an African American person and a Caucasian person, to look at the issues of communal security. How can we harden and ensure that we are adequately protecting our synagogues, our schools, our institutions? We're doing that in partnership with the Jewish Federation of North America, their SCAN initiative, and the learnings we take, we will invest in our own community and then share that with black churches, with Sikh temples, with mosques and Islamic centers. No one should be afraid to pray in a house of worship. No one should be afraid to send their child to school. No one should be afraid to take their parents or their children to drop off here at the JCC. And so we're determined to do something about it. Finally, what does the future look like? Where are we going from here? Well, I told you we do three things: advocacy, education, law enforcement. Where I think we're going is that eventually we will make a push on the advocacy side through our Center for Technology and Society to make sure, as we have hate crimes laws, we will have cyber hate laws in all 50 states to protect our children and ourselves from the online harassment and horror that can also often happen on social media. We will expand our anti-bias education programs. It's great to reach 1.5 million kids. My goal is 30 million. So anti-bias education becomes a central element of your kids' experience in school. And then finally, we'll move from training 15,000 to 300,000 law enforcement officers. So the bold and brave men and women who protect us every day understand how hate happens, understand the threat of extremism, and are prepared with the tools they need to deal with it. This is how we make our community safer. This is how we stop extremism. This is how we address anti-Semitism. With that, I'll conclude and take questions. Thank you. I'm actually going to ask my colleague George Green. George, you should come up and do the Q&A with me. So when I get a hard question, I'm going to throw it to George. I hope that's okay.
So at this time, I'd like to ask the students that are here from Franklin Jewish Academy and from Waterford, Vermont. These are students that are very invested in what we do at ADL, and I'd like to invite them to come. There are open mics for Q&A. We're going to start with some questions that we invited questions online, so people sent me some questions. I'm going to start with the elephant in the room. Jonathan, can you comment on Rashida Tlaib?
I heard of her. Rashida Tlaib. So, here's what I would say. Obviously, she is part of this class of new members of Congress. It's the most diverse freshman class I think the country has ever seen. And I think Congresswoman Tlaib in particular, you know, my staff, I have not met her, my staff has met her. So I can't speak from personal experience in dealing with her, but what I can say is that she knows some things and there's some things she just doesn't know. So we recently had an incident, it must be 2 weeks ago or so, with her tweet. Or actually, let me step back. She made a comment in a podcast interview about quote-unquote Palestine and how it warmed her heart, how her ancestors had welcomed the Jews who were fleeing the Holocaust. Something like that. Created a haven. Not quite. So look, let's acknowledge that her grandmother still lives on the West Bank and still lives with the challenges that are entailed with that. So I totally get that, and we should be sympathetic to that. But the fact of the matter is, and this is what I tweeted about it, I think people in positions of authority should clarify or correct when they get the facts wrong. And her facts were wrong. So, not only was she implying that Israel was created as a haven for Jews who were fleeing the Holocaust, when there had been a persistent indigenous presence of Jews there for thousands of years, but suggesting that they were welcomed by the indigenous people is, again, just flat out wrong. They weren't. And you can look at history books to read about the Arab riots, to read about the constant attacks that these people faced. There was no haven for them. There was only what they were able to work out for themselves. So I call that out, period. And yet, it's also incredibly unhelpful when folks on the other side try to politicize this issue too. So she was wrong for what she said, and it was wrong for certain actors on the other side politically to cut short her quotes and imply that she said that the Holocaust warmed her heart, or whatever crazy thing that was said. Again, I didn't like what she said because it was incorrect, and I would expect that she would correct it. I also don't like when other people make anti-Semitism a football. One more time, I don't really care how you vote, I care what you value. And when we politicize this issue, all of us lose. And I think that was a deeply problematic experience.
Thank you, Jonathan. I want you to add to that about the care that we took in creating your op-ed and making sure that we had our facts straight, because I think that's really important to us here in the community. So.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we need to be hysterical. I think we can focus on the facts. I don't think we need to be over-emotional. I think we can, again, try to stay calm. Look, at the ADL, you know, we're living in a moment right now where everyone, if you watch cable news, or you look at your Facebook news feed, it seems like everyone is on a team. You're on the home team, you're on the away team. You're on the red team, you're on the blue team. Like, guess what? I don't want to be on any team. At the ADL, we're the referee. It's our job to call, or the umpire, if you will. It's our job to call balls and strikes, and to sit behind home plate. And that's what I feel like we're trying to do. And so, yeah, we take care, and we try to be deliberate, and we try to be fact-based, and try very hard to get it right.
Thanks, Jonathan. George, maybe you want to take this, but Jonathan, you could also. I believe that the main reason that there's hatred is because of the haves and the have-nots. As I see it, the increase in hate crimes is directly connected to the income disparity in the U.S. With the decline of the middle class, equal public education, and job loss for untrained workers, it seems to me frustration sets in and anger occurs. And it seems to me that this is the one root of the problem. Can either of you comment on that? I mean, we both work with law enforcement, but George.
Carolyn, thank you. Let me try to start with that, and then feel free to jump in. So, I'll answer this question in two ways. Since just after 9/11, I've spent nearly my entire professional life serving in the military test on issues related to homeland security, counterterrorism, domestic security affairs, etc. And when you try to peel back the layers as to the root causes and drivers of terrorism, of instability, of acts of violence or extremism, there's an array of factors, and I'm fairly familiar with this area of scholarship for the better part of almost 20 years. And when you look at incidents of terrorism, the camp is not in one discernible category. It's not just economic drivers, or a political ideology, or a religious interpretation. There's usually an array of factors, and so the question is a hard one when we're thinking about the rise of anti-Semitism, of extremism, of hate and bigotry and bias in all its forms domestically here in this country today. While economics and disparity can play a role, it's difficult to place a percentage on how much. Because while we're looking for kind of a silver bullet to say, oh, that's the cause, and if only we fix that, that's going to be an issue, there are other compounding factors with the frequency and fluidity and the ease in which, can I share yours? The speed in which information travels on social media, the rate at which information can be exchanged in an unchecked form or fashion. So I do think polarization among classes, sects, races, etc. is a factor. I'm reluctant, based on looking at this in a security context, to attribute a significant portion to those issues in and of themselves.
I guess the only thing I would say to add, it's going to work for me maybe, is that we do know from the Jewish people know from their own experience that in times of economic distress, in times of social anxiety, the Jews are often blamed. We have seen this happen again and again and again. You can look at the yellow vest protests that are roiling France right now. Again, I saw this firsthand just a couple weeks ago. And that started out as protests by farmers directed at the government on the issue of pricing and whatnot. Those protests are now taking place once a week on Saturdays, and they're invariably filled with crazy anti-Semitic invective. They're blaming the Jews. They're blaming Macron, who used to work for the Rothschild Bank, which remains a financial institution in France. Well, guess what? That fills the anti-Semites' fantasy about Jewish conspiracies. And we saw this in Germany in the 30s. And we've seen it again and again. So I think George is correct to say, it isn't just one thing, you don't know how much. But I can tell you, as the head of the ADL, I worry a great deal about this. And if our government can't figure out solutions, like that, the polarization that results, the frustration that results, could certainly end up engulfing us.
Okay, this question is from Al Feldman. Mr. Greenblatt, it's time to end the defense and go on the offense. It's time to end the defense and go on the offense. Anti-Semitism and hate are growing exponentially in the United States, both in the media and lately with murders in synagogues. As a longtime supporter, I've asked the leaders of ADL what they are doing to combat these issues. And they respond, we're working on programs in the background, and it's a delicate issue. I don't know. I don't really say it's a delicate issue myself, but I've only been with ADL for about a year or so. History tells us that being quiet brings disastrous results. Neither the Democrats nor Republicans are speaking out against anti-Semitism. Why isn't ADL on national TV speaking out at every opportunity, loudly and frequently? Working behind the scenes is not effective. Let's see the results.
Well, I'll take this and maybe I'll give it to you. So look, I hear the questioner's frustration because I feel it the same way. I mean, I don't think anti-Semitism is some abstraction. It is not. It is a very real reality. I told you about the attacks in Brooklyn, where people who are visibly Jewish, visibly identified as Jewish, are getting attacked and beaten in the street. I told you about the arson attacks in places like Boston and Chicago. We've recounted what's happened in places like Poway and Pittsburgh, and shared the data. So at ADL, we are trying very hard to take the offense. And again, I think some of the bets we're making to counter extremism, to deal with cyber, I hope will pay off. And we'll do everything that we can to make sure that our story is told to national media to consume. And we do that every single day. Okay. If that caller or that question has more specifics, I'm open to ideas and suggestions. And you can hit me on Twitter, because I want to hear what you have to say, or you can talk to me afterwards here.
George?
I'll just add one thing. After last week, I personally got called and testified in front of the House Oversight Committee on issues of white supremacy and extremism. 3 weeks before that, my colleague, Eileen Hirschnoff, who was on the screen earlier, she testified in front of the House Judiciary Committee. If you look at the analysis and you look at the trends on Fox, on CNN, on MSNBC, on CNBC, after Pittsburgh, after Poway, it was Jonathan Greenblatt, it was one of our other colleagues who was on every major cable news channel. Now granted, there's a lot of hours of programming, but if you look for where ADL is, it's in the halls of Congress, it's in the House, it's in the Senate, we're on cable news, we're on local TV. Carolyn's been quoted in every major newspaper in Michigan related to these issues. So to the extent that individuals in the audience have an idea or suggestions on how we can continue to amplify that, the folks up here on the stage work tirelessly on that every day. We'd love greater recommendations.
I actually am going to charge you all with an opportunity, with a job. So I'm the regional director. I have a small team, and we have volunteers, and we have board members, and we all talk about ADL all the time. But this theater is pretty full. You all have learned tonight some of the things ADL does. I'm deputizing you. Talk to your friends, talk to your neighbors, and you tell them what you learned tonight. So that's your homework for tonight. I'm sorry to give you all homework. School's almost out for the year, so some of us need a little bit of work to do, so I'm just going to say that. This one, oh, you know what? We're going to go to Hannah. Hannah, do you have somebody in the back? Somebody? Anybody? Okay.
There's a question down here.
Oh, okay. Hannah, come on down. While Hannah is coming down, oh, she's there. Well done. Oh, there we go.
All of the things that you've said you're doing, one thing that I didn't hear, perhaps you could talk with the media about them turning down their rhetoric, and also for members of Congress. I think that the hate that's going around is so pervasive in every area that just winds people up so much, and particularly on the mainstream media, the same stories are told over and over and over again all day long, getting people very riled up. And also on programs like The View, you hear tremendous hostility, and late night TV, extreme hostility. So maybe that's a new avenue for ADL, not just on social media, but on mainstream media.
Yeah. What's your name, ma'am?
My name is Doreen, and I'm a co-president of Michigan Jewish Action Council.
Well, thank you for the question, Doreen. I mean, I think you're not wrong. The fact of the matter is the media, which is sort of like feeding the beast, and they learned long ago that if it bleeds, it leads. And they sometimes seem to only lean into the worst stories. And that, again, can help fuel the fire. So it's always a balance, because you want attention on these issues without sort of encouraging copycats or imitators. So I don't think we necessarily, I mean, we're far from perfect. I think we try to have a tone that is strong but serious, and that is, again, fact-based and not all hysterical. To try to be a moderate voice of reason, it's not always easy. It's not always easy.
Betty, you have a person over there? Yes?
Hi, Tony Spacagni. I'm a former proud member of the ADL Regional Board. I agree with you that anti-Semitism and violence starts at the top and filters down, especially in this country, on the right. What I fear more is the anti-Semitism coming from the left, because facially it appears more intellectual, it appears more empathetic, it appears more designed to appeal to people's emotions, not related to hate, but related to love. To what extent do you find, if at all, that what's going on in Israel politically is feeding anti-Semitism on the left?
So I think that's a fair question, Tony. But I don't know that I'll just tell you, I don't totally agree with the premise. So I think, look, there's a lot about our country that I don't like. There are things about our government that I don't like. But I'm not opposed to the existence of America. And there are things about other countries that I might not like, plus I might not like, but I don't oppose their existence. It's only the Jewish state. It is only the Jewish state where a problem with policy is somehow translated to people questioning the right of the country to exist in the first place. So, but I think that is just, I think the problems with policy are typically used as a convenient cover.
Well, I agree with that, but I'm asking, to what extent does it feed the anti-Semitism on the left?
So I think, yeah, look, I mean, I just feel like, I hear what you're saying totally, Tony, and I think people can be frustrated about certain activities over there in the region and use that to make an excuse as to why they should, again, adopt anti-Zionism, or use that as an excuse to why they feel the need to deface a synagogue, or use that as an excuse to why they feel the need to go out and hit someone. But I think it's disgusting. And there are plenty of organizations that are critical of policies of the state of Israel that don't lapse into anti-Semitism. One I can think of that will criticize the state of Israel at that time is the ADL. So the idea that, and they love, I often hear critics say that, oh, you say all criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic. You don't want to talk about the issues. That's baloney. Hebrew National, baloney. I mean, again, there's nothing wrong with talking tough about the issues. There's something wrong when we question the right of the state to exist. I know you hear me, and I'm just saying, I think people will use that as a pretext or an excuse, and I think it's wrong, deeply wrong.
Betty, we'll go to you again.
Technical question. There's a, Howard Lax, there is a conference of, there's a national conference of commissioners on uniform state laws. Are you working with them on a cyber hate law? And if so, what stage does that work at?
So I think that's a question for George, yeah?
I don't believe we're working with them. I'll find you right after this breaks, and I'll ask for your help to make sure that we are.
So what I know we're doing, Howard, is we have civil rights councils across the country, and we're looking at writing model statutes right now that we can introduce in state legislatures, and also working with folks in Washington to see if we can explore on the federal level. I'm not optimistic of our ability to make progress at the federal level in the current political configuration, so we think the state might be a viable way to go.
And we've done it before, and we're going to try to do it now.
I'm going to take another question that was sent to me. I am one person, and I feel as if this issue, especially anti-Semitism, is too big to tackle. But I want to do something. What can I do as a small person, one person, to do to stop the rise of hate and anti-Semitism?
Let me start, if I may. That is a really, really great question, and that is the reason that Carolyn and everyone in the room who's ADL staff, raise your hand for 1 second. ADL staff, ADL board members, raise your hand for 1 second.
Raise your hand high.
Yeah. Each person can make a difference. And let me just put this in context. Prior to working at the ADL, I worked in the federal government. I worked for an agency called the Department of Homeland Security. The Department of Homeland Security has 230,000 employees. It has an annual budget of $60 billion, okay? I was just one person. But within a large organization, you can effectuate change, you can create and implement policy, and you can engage with individuals related to policy or programs and change their perceptions or misperceptions of certain policy or programs. There is so much that one person could do. Within ADL here locally, our categories of advocacy, education, of partnering and training with law enforcement, there's a range of things that both volunteers, donors, and supporters can do, and depending on whosever question it was, the technical expertise from that person, we can find dozens of ways for you to plug in right here in your own backyard.
So I'll just elaborate and give you 3 things to think about, how you can deal with anti-Semitism. Number 1, speak up. So when you hear a comment at the water cooler, when you see a post on Facebook, when you see a tweet that's questionable, flag the tweet, flag the post, stop the person who made the comment, and when you're in school and you hear a comment, first thing you have to do is you have to say something. So speak up, call it out. That's number 1. First thing you can do, call it out. Number 2, share facts. Don't send the crazy, email from your great uncle Morty who said that a certain president was born in Kenya or whatever lunacy. Don't do that. Focus on facts. Be informed. Respond with information, not with rhetoric. And number 3, show strength. Like, be positive, be proud. Don't hang back. You have nothing to apologize for. So speak up, share facts, show strength. That's how we win.
I'm going to add one more. Support the people who support you. Hannah, you've got a question right here. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Greenblatt. David Kelton, local Jew. I promote social media supporting local synagogues, and I have hundreds of, I don't call them trolls, that follow me, and I've engaged in a lot of debate, largely centering around like immigration, multiculturalism, some of it to success, convincing, dispelling untruths. How productive do you think it is to engage, so to say, the trolls, people with honest questions, and then when it comes to a point where that's basically all I do is debating immigration and type issues?
I'll tell you, David, so I can speak for myself, and I'd like George to jump in too. But David, I don't ever respond to trolls. I don't ever dignify them with my time. I don't want to legitimize them with my attention. And so depending on how many followers you have and how public these back and forths can be, I just don't do it. So it might be successful for you, but I find so often that the people who show up on social media have already made their minds up. So my advice about trolls is to either ignore them, block them, or report them if you have a case.
I don't respond either. I usually, within 24 hours, try and post something on my personal page that is more proactive myself, but I don't respond. In fact, we got one earlier this week, didn't we, Emily? Yeah. And we don't respond. I'm going to take another question. I'm concerned, why is it important to print reports and statistics? I wonder if talking about this fuels the madness. And does ADL weigh in on mental health as a reason for hate crimes?
Good question. So let me share two stats. In 2017, the federal government, the FBI, the Department of Justice, released their annual report on hate crimes. For those of you that don't know, the FBI only reports publicly on 3 things every single year. Every year, the FBI reports on 3 things. One is the number of police officers at the state and local level across the country who are killed in the line of duty. That's one thing they report on every single year. Second thing they report on is national crime statistics across the country to just keep track of crime, to inform local laws, etc. And the third thing they keep track of, and they report on every single year, is hate crimes. Every single year. In calendar year 2017, the FBI reported there was a 17% increase in hate crimes across the United States. Overall. And within minority communities, within religious communities, the Jewish community was the greatest number of hate crimes across the United States. So when we put out reports and statistics, to Jonathan's point on be informed, come with the facts, it's so important that across the year, last year, calendar year 2018, the research team that I managed put out 10 seminal reports over the course of a 12-month calendar year on issues of extremism, anti-Semitism, xenophobia, anti-immigrant extremism, etc. A range of different topics so that we are the primary source for information. We're not just taking news clips and putting them together. The audit of anti-Semitic incidents that ADL puts out every year, we have and own that proprietary data. We cultivate it, we curate it, we fact check it, and then you know what we do with it? Not just write the report, we put it on our website and we make it open source. So on the heat map that's on the homepage of the ADL website, we created a map that we call the heat map. HEAT, H-E-A-T, stands for hatred, extremism, anti-Semitism, and terrorism. We made all of our data sets public so that students in high school and college, university level academics can take our data and issue their own reports. Our information is not opinion, it's not analysis, it's not ADL's point of view. These are facts. These are hard numbers that we make publicly available for law enforcement, public safety professionals, state and local officials to take and apply in their own context with the hope ultimately of making better laws, greater community partnerships, etc. So there is an incredible imperative to driving an intellectual conversation that's rigorous and fact-based and empirical.
I agree with all that.
Great.
Can I just say one other thing? I'm actually reflecting on my response to Tony about Israel and kind of the threat on the left. So there is definitely an issue, I just want to make sure I say this loud and clear. There is definitely an issue with the anti-Zionist fringe going mainstream. That there's an issue with them trying to legitimize that way of thinking as if we're a mainstream political view when it isn't. It shouldn't be, and it isn't. And we need to be clear-eyed about that and call it out. But make no mistake, white supremacy is a global terror threat. And there is a straight line from Pittsburgh, from Charlottesville to Pittsburgh to Christchurch to San Diego. And George's team is involved on a daily basis in working with law enforcement, helping to avert threats against our community. In the last few months, I think about the situation in Seattle, think about another in Philadelphia, or was it in Pennsylvania, where literally violent extremists were intercepted by ADL analysts collecting information. And there were other stories, like the Coast Guard lieutenant, who had a cache of firearms in his house that would make the National Guard blush, who was preparing to go commit political assassinations. So I hear you about the issues on the left. I think I talked about it at great length, and we're confronting it in a very clear-eyed way, but do not discount the violent threat from this white supremacist movement. You might not see it at the university, you might not see it in Ann Arbor. You might not see it on the campus of Columbia University. But I just want to make sure I say loud and clear, it is very real, it is very dangerous. And literally, it is killing Jews, and bent on doing much more of it.
I want to also mention that in Michigan, our local data, and I'll be available afterwards too if any of you have questions about Michigan and our efforts here, but in Michigan, make no mistake, we have seen white supremacy activity in almost every county that in Michigan. I mean, it's all over the place. It's on campuses, every single campus that you can think of. I'm afraid that the time is getting too late, but I don't want to, we'll take a couple more questions. Ben, I think there's one right behind you. Oh, okay, so, okay.
Great.
Oh, wow, we've got a lot more questions. Okay.
We can take them quickly in succession.
Yeah, let's take them.
Hi, my name is Lily. As someone starting college in the fall and someone who's politically active, I'm interested in your thoughts on handling or balancing standing up for my more typically left-leaning beliefs and working with those who, that we may have a lot of similar values and beliefs, have their own intersectionalist prejudice and happen to be anti-Semitic, which they cover up as being anti-Israel.
Yeah, I think you got to show up. Lily, my strong side is to show up. We lose when we withdraw and we retreat. We lose when we see the kind of, and this is for all you guys in the front row, we lose when we see these public spaces to the fringe. When we allow them to box us out with their bigotry. When we allow them to exclude us with their intolerance. So my strongest advice to you is to show up. I mean, you have to be in it to win it, and if we're not, they can't.
Lily, afterwards, I'll get you, come see me, and I'll get you with our education team, and we'll give you some tools, okay?
Can I make a suggestion? Everyone has a question, stand up. I'm not kidding. And we'll try to take them in unison. You have a few of you ask, we'll answer, and then the rest of you can go, okay?
Okay.
That way everybody gets.
Then go to the...
Ben, you're gonna have to hustle.
Okay.
Where's Hannah? We need your help too.
Okay. Hi, so I just finished my second year at Wayne State.
What's your name?
My name is Justin. I just finished my second year at Wayne State, and in the 2 years I've been there, there have been 8 instances of anti-Semitism, whether it's swastikas being drawn or murals being defaced with like violent imagery and stuff. We've gone to the dean, we've gone to Hillel, and pretty much what they said was the best thing to do is to do nothing. What can we do?
We'll talk afterwards, Justin. Fine. Easy. That's easy one to answer.
Thanks. Hi. I'm Mike Brown. I'm a filmmaker. My next movie, not for a shameless plug, but better here than anywhere else. We're taking on Modern Rise in Anti-Semitism. We've been in pre-production for months. I'd like to talk to you offline about that.
Afterwards, there's coffee.
Super easy.
Yep.
Okay. Back here.
Hannah?
Hi, I'm Heidi Budai, and
Heidi. Heidi is our former regional director and still a member of the ADL family.
yes, and will always be for life, but
And a ringer.
I'm not a ringer because I promised you this was not pre-prepared. But I do have a question. Jonathan, you stated as one of your things that all of us could do is to stand up and speak out. And I know that a concern in our community is for our college students who are facing BDS on campus and who may not have the tools that they need to stand up to anti-Semitism. So I have a dual question for you and probably for George as well. What tools do you have that you're sharing with college campuses to help them, to help our students on campus? Number one. Number two, there have been a lot of disturbing stories in the news. How are we helping teachers and families discuss these topics with their families and their students?
That's great.
Let's go to a couple more questions, then we'll answer that. No, we'll get to it. Don't worry, I promise, Heidi. Over here.
Hi, I was wondering if you could quickly...
What's your name?
Jennifer Kroll. If you could quickly go over any of those ideas that the college students had in the Shark Tank.
Oh, great, yeah. We'll do that. So we got Heidi and Jennifer, and then take one more here, and then this gentleman, and then we'll answer.
Hi, my name is Gary Freed from Ann Arbor. And one of the things that you mentioned was what we do see in Ann Arbor, and that's actually for over 15 years now. a weekly protest outside of our conservative synagogue.
I've seen those signs. They're ugly, Gary.
I took the pictures for my daughter to show them to you, Michelle
Wait.
Freed.
Are you Michelle's dad?
Yes.
Michelle's mom too, I see.
And Michelle's mom is right there.
Bravo.
Michelle's one of our
works.
best employees. We love Michelle. So, Professor Freed, your question.
Appreciate that. So my question is that the signs out in front of our synagogue have migrated from just anti-Israel signs to the one I'm sure Michelle showed you, which said, resist Jewish power. Now, I'm not scared of the people outside. I'm scared of the impact they have on the people who drive by. And we're at a loss, because of free speech issues, of how to be able to deal with that type of presence outside of our
I
shore.
think I got it. So we should talk about this after too.
Yep.
Okay. So we have this gentleman here. Oh, we have this young lady out over here.
Yep.
Is this somebody?
Okay.
And then
Michael?
we have this gentleman here, and then
Yep.
we'll answer all the questions.
She's
coming with the mic.
Emily's coming with the mic, Michael.
Michael Starling, longtime board member of ADL, and I'm the executive committee here in Michigan. Very proud to be so. So my question is regarding freedom of speech and social media. Most of us have heard the famous quote from the 30s from Supreme Court Justice Felix Frankfurter, who said, freedom of speech does not give you the right to yell fire in a crowded theater. So what suggestions for changes in our laws for things that are over the line on social media, where people are saying things to incite violence against Jews or any others in society? What do you think can be done, and has it been done in other countries where you think it's successful?
Okay. So I've got yours, and we'll take this last one, and we'll answer them all.
Hi, I have the last one. So my name is Shadi Martini. I'm a Muslim and in Arab and involved with ADL a bit. My question is regarding outreach. I was raised in the Middle East. The education system and the information system during my life was there was a lot of disinformation, there was a lot of anti-Semitism. And a lot of people here, and we are living in a community.
Shadi, where were you raised?
In Syria.
In Syria.
Yes. I live here in Michigan. I'm a proud Michigander. But the issue is the question about outreach to other communities. You mentioned that the highest hate crimes is against the Jewish community, but also there's a hike in anti-Muslim crimes. And unfortunately, the Muslim community are not aware of the anti-Semitism high crime rate that's here in the US. So there's my personal experience. I had a learning curve 5 years ago, and I visited Israel, and I've been involved in interfaith communications, but there's a lack of outreach to the other communities, specifically the Muslim community. And I sense a lot of willingness in my community to have this dialogue, because a lot of people understand that, like you mentioned, it starts with the Jewish people, but it doesn't end there. So this is a subject that we need to work together, and I think ADL has a very good platform for outreach to other communities that will help us come together to confront this anti-Semitism that I think doesn't stop with the Jewish community. Thank you very much.
Okay. So we've got a bunch of questions. Why don't we start with Hadi's question? Do you want to try to take Hadi's question?
Shadi, right?
Shadi, sorry.
Let me start with that. So, full disclosure, I am not Jewish. My parents are Egyptian Lebanese immigrants who landed in Cleveland, Ohio in 1970. And for those of you that know Cleveland, sorry Michigan, but I claim Michigan also as my home because my wife was born, raised, educated, high school and college in the great state of Michigan as well. So I can claim allegiance to both states. My point is that as an Arab American who oversees all the national programs at the ADL and does so proudly, I should footnote, as we think about acts of bigotry, discrimination, defamation, intolerance, there's no greater moment in time for groups that have faced persecution and have faced bigotry and have faced intolerance historically, to stand with, and the numbers show it, the Jewish community at this moment in time, which has historic off-the-chart levels of anti-Semitism, discrimination, etc. That said, that's not to minimize any other community, and historically communities of color in this country, and there's a long civil rights movement in this country in which communities of color and other ethnic and religious minority communities have suffered grave injustices, which are not to be overshadowed at all. And it's that platform through which I try to approach this work and my job specifically within the ADL, and I agree with you completely. There's no greater time for outreach and inclusion. Part of what we're doing across the country, both here in Michigan and in 24 other places across the United States, is build greater partnerships with Arab, Muslim, Sikh, South Asian, Latino, African American, LGBTQ communities, etc. Because communities that are affected by hate, we often refer to anti-Semitism as the canary in the coal mine. If you're in a city somewhere where there's an act of anti-Semitism, there's an act of desecration against the JCC, against the synagogue, you know what? There's probably people in that city that hate Arabs and Muslims too. And if they hate Arabs or Muslims, they probably think that they hate Sikhs, who they perceive to be Arab, Muslim, or South Asian. And if there's attacks against any ethnic or religious minority community, that type of discrimination and defamation at the hands of the grave threat that Jonathan underscored of white supremacy stops nowhere. So I take your point, there's absolutely no greater time for outreach among religious and faith communities. This is part of an issue we're exploring on how to ramp up in the here and now, so would love to talk to you more after.
George, can you connect the education, the question Heidi asked?
Yeah,
Also
I'm gonna do that. So, I want to go to, before I go to Heidi's question, I want to go to Mike's question about free speech and online issues. So, we are working on a daily basis with the companies. The fact of the matter is, Mike, we know about you can't yell cry, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. And freedom of speech isn't the freedom to slander people. And freedom of expression isn't the freedom to incite violence against people. And so the first thing we're trying to do is to encourage the companies to enforce their own terms of service that bar hate speech, their own terms of use that are intended to prevent online bullying and harassment. That's our first avenue, is to engage them to actually do their job. And at the same time, legislation can help fill gaps in the law because techniques like doxing are not covered by the law today. So it is legally permissible for me, legally permissible, to not only put your name and your home address and your home phone and your cell phone and your place of work and how to reach you there. I can also connect what your children's names are, which I could find out via the internet, and their social media accounts, and where they go to school and who their teachers are. And I can encourage people to go tell their teachers, tell your children's teachers how they feel about you. Or to call you on the phone and to share their feelings with you. I could do that. That's doxing, releasing public information like that, and that is not what Thomas and Jefferson had in mind when he wrote the First Amendment. So there's work to be done just on the basic terms of service, then to fill gaps in the law. As it relates to Professor Freed, so we will talk about that offline and see what we can do. We've got enough civil rights lawyers at the ADL that we should be able to figure that out. I'm going to come to Heidi and then transition back to George. So we have a ton of tools at ADL.org, including our program called Think, Plan, Act, which was designed for college students like Lily, or the gentleman from Wayne State, Justin, right, from Wayne State, to help you deal with when anti-Semitism, when anti-Israel criticism becomes anti-Semitism on campus. So you can go to ADL.org and literally get these tools, and they're a great place to start to know how to deal with this and confront it when you find it. So I'll pass to you if you want to add on to that. I also want to make sure we touch on this issue of the ideas from the Innovate Against Hate program that Jennifer asked about.
The last point I'll add to Heidi's question on campus, so the resource that Jonathan mentioned is a platform, is a system through which we can address these issues. To the question on college campuses, the name of the program that's on our website, we've got tons of resources on it. It's called Hate Uncycled. It's about thinking, planning, and acting, and really providing the resources to undergraduate and graduate students on college campuses across the country for a framework through which how to approach these issues, not just to be reactive when and if an incident were to happen. To your question, let me just spend 2 seconds on what were some of the ideas. So, Innovate Against Hate, part of the questions that we get from audiences like this is, what are you doing about this? Like, what's the program you're launching? Part of the realization in today's social media environment and in the threat environment that we see across the country is we are not going to have all the best ideas. So last year we took a little bit of a risk. We crowdsourced or open sourced what our ideas or our platforms should be. So over the course of a 15-week undergraduate university semester, we took 25 schools across the country and we asked professors in business, marketing, mass media, social communications, etc., social media, to put aside their syllabus for a semester and adopt ADL as their syllabus. And their syllabus was literally titled Innovate Against Hate. And over the course of the 15-week semester, the class had to break up into a group and identify a target audience, create a social media campaign to target online hate, bigotry, and extremism, and then launch the campaign and measure the effectiveness of it as part of their final. As a result, to Jonathan's point, the top 3 schools got flown to DC. We literally did a Shark Tank style competition. And the top school, and I'll share all actually the school's programs with us, we invested, I think, like $3,000 or $5,000 into that class specifically so that they could take their online social media platform to scale and continue to do it. And our hope is, with events like this, raise awareness and continue to create opportunities in which ADL can further facilitate, crowdsource what the solution should be in a peer-to-peer, youth-first, young people leadership model. And there's tons of great ideas and innovations that program came up with. I've got a whole catalog I can share with you offline.
So, thank you very, very much, Jonathan and George. Doesn't end here, it starts here. There are cookies and water and coffee out there. It's because, number one, Jewish people like to have a little mash after everything we do. However, it's to foster communication. I would be remiss in thanking the people that helped this event get off the ground, including Emily Snyder, Arlene Platt, and Kristen Jagger, members of our team, board members, Michael Sterling and Bruce Frankel, people who came to me and said, we need to do this. So, foster communication. I'm out there, Jonathan, George will be out there. Please talk to us, ask us your questions individually. Thank you very, very much for coming.